Hello and welcome everybody. You're joining Jo Marie Shanks here from South Glos Parents and Carers, and today we will be finding out a little bit more about the South Glos Inclusion Toolkit. And joining me today is...
It's Kim Lloyd. I'm the interim lead for inclusion and standards in South Glos. Wow, and lovely to see you, Jo.
What is the SEN Inclusion Toolkit and who is it for?
Okay, so we really thought as a local authority how we could try and get clarity in all the schools and settings across South Gloucestershire about what really are the key principles of getting the very best provision in place for children and young people with special educational needs. And so Hilary Smith, who's head of education, learning and skills, asked me a year ago if I would contribute to this. And I've been in education for 41 years, and about 20 of that has been in special schools and in a variety of roles in schools as well as local authorities. And I suppose inclusion is just absolutely central to everything I do. So I was really humbled and excited, and that began the journey of working with other professionals in South Gloucestershire to really think about what is it that we need. Now, in the past, there's been handbooks and they're really useful, but we're in the 21st century. And the difficulty with a handbook is it's usually outdated by the time it's printed and it's in someone's office. So we really thought about who the audience for this toolkit should be. And the audience is absolutely head teachers, SENCOs and teachers. So this is a leadership tool and it's a teaching and learning tool. And what we've tried to do in the 10 sections is almost have bite-sized pieces. So as a busy head teacher, I want to know about the legal framework. I can click onto section 1 on the website and I can find that information in no more than 2 pages. So we really thought about in the 10 chapters what would be the key areas that schools and settings would need to really make sure that they had the right provision in place. So section 1 was really about principles, and it was about, well, why are we doing this? What is it about? And you'll know as a parent, and I know as a parent, that the Code of Practice, our 2015 code, which is being reviewed at the moment, there will be changes. There is a national review of what's working and what could be better. But the Code of Practice absolutely puts parents and families at the centre of everything to do with SEN. And we want this toolkit to move from rhetoric, so what we know we should be doing, to actually really doing it. So section 1 is absolutely setting out our stall. So it's about working in partnership with families and parents, and also providing clarity and transparency when a school is explaining the sort of provision that they're making. So section 2 is absolutely about what we all should be doing at each stage of the graduated approach. And it gives an evidence-based reference for schools and settings following the principles of the graduated approach. So in section 2 you will see links to the Autism Education Trust, to the Communication Trust, to the Dyslexia Association. So it's all about now, at this moment in time, what is the very best practice that we can adopt with the very best advice and guidance. So in that principle section of section 1, you'll find things like a little bit about South Gloucestershire, so the national and local context. You'll find working with parents is absolutely in section 1 because that's a key principle. A person-centred approach is in section 1 because it's a key principle. The local offer is in section 1. So we've really tried to gather the very best advice about the why. Why are we doing this? What is it about? And it's really about, I suppose, trying to push our vision, Hilary's vision, that we'll only be successful in South Gloucestershire as a whole when we're all successful. And it's about collaboration, it's about trust, it's about sharing of best practice, and it's about evidence-based approaches and practice-led evidence, what we know works. So it's a toolkit that is growing, 10 sections, which we can talk a little bit more about in a moment, will be updated yearly. And we're at the stage now where it was published in July. We had our launch last week and 236, I think, people joined the launch, which was terrifying because I couldn't see anybody, but I could see people coming into the meeting. And it's I suppose we're at the stage where we've done all the hard work. If I like using the analogy of building a house, the toolkit allows schools to build a really firm foundation, and that's where we are now, and we're ready to build.
I've got two boys, one has an EHCP and one's on SEN Support, and the two things are just worlds apart. They're completely different. So what will it mean for children who are on the SEN Support register?
So the toolkit in the main is focused on getting that provision right for SEN support. So if we think of what the graduated approach is about, so the assess, plan, do, review, that should be for every child on an SEN record of need in any school or setting. And what South Glos is committed to do is put the support in, well, identify early, put the support in early, and through the SEND clusters, which I view those, I suppose, a bit of the workhorse of the toolkit, because that's where all this exciting practice is going to happen. So rather than, which is what it is at the moment, for you as a parent, I'm sure, thinking that you will only get the right support in place if your child has an education health needs assessment, which results in a plan. And what we're saying is no. So in the cluster, with our 5 clusters, it's what are the needs within your cluster of schools, and let's get the right professionals working within those clusters so that children access this right support at the right time.
Spoke to Kate East last week to find out a little bit more about how, you know, the cluster fund project. It's really good to see that the two are intertwined and they're not, you know, separate, and you know, they really do complement each other and have the same sort of goals and outcomes that they want to achieve, which is brilliant.
Absolutely. When I started working with Hilary last year and started the toolkit, it was a little bit like, I'm not very good at jigsaw puzzles, but there seemed to be lots of pieces of good things that were happening in South Glos. But they didn't necessarily join up. And last year, while we were writing the toolkit, you know, I did lots of meetings. I know I met with parents from the Parent Carer Forum, Joe, worked with primary head teachers and secondary head teachers and SENCOs and other professionals. So a lot of work with educational psychologists and people from the behaviour support team. And we really looked at how everything needed to join up. And in my work, you know, at the moment, it's very much working with clusters and I'm working with those cluster leads who will be absolutely pivotal in driving the South Glos toolkit.
To be very much like a change in a cultural approach as well. So it, you know, really something to bed down so that it sort of runs through everyday practice within an education setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I suppose a bit of an analogy, sorry, an English teacher, it's a bit like the launch was almost as if we've got our foundations and we ran along the springboard and we've jumped. And what we know that we need to do now as a local authority is really support all of us with the same messaging. So we have to have that clarity of messaging when we're working with schools, and we have to all in health, social care and education really promote, as you say, Jo, it's that changing culture, that we have, you know, our vision, what are we actually driving towards, and there's lots of training that's part of the toolkit. So I know many of your parents will know this, but the code of practice is incredibly long, and it's 300 and something pages. And I think one of the key things we want to get right in this toolkit, I think I mentioned earlier that it's a leadership tool, and I've worked in schools for 41 years, and I know how busy and how frenetic schools and settings can be, but actually, if you take those 235 pages, which I think it is, there's only 16 that a school leader needs to know, 18, sorry, and that's in chapter 6. And so chapter 6 of the Code of Practice, if every single school absolutely understood what they should be putting in place, I think there would be more clarity and accountability. And that's really what we're trying to do. So this week, Malcolm Reeve, who is a national leader of education, he works for Whole School SEND, he's been a head teacher of several special schools, and he's an incredible guy. We commissioned him last year to produce for every single school in South Gloucestershire, not special schools actually, so primary and secondary schools. He was commissioned to send them 2 really useful bits of information. One of them was an Excel spreadsheet with data, their SEN data, and another one was something called Send in a Nutshell, which is how you have a 1-page profile of your school to really help every single teacher, every single member of support staff, sharing with parents and governors of what your SEN profile is in your school, and everyone understand that. And on Tuesday he worked with our cluster leads and members of education and learning and skills team, and last night we had 86 colleagues from schools, from primary and secondary schools, who joined the meeting. So that's new for South Gloucestershire. We now have, you know, we are really pushing that to get any provision right, you have to understand the needs of your children within your school. And we've given head teachers a tool to do that.
So understanding your SEN profile as a school, is that, when you say it's a 1-page document, it's not a 1-page document with the children's information, it's the overview of the needs that are within the school. And
so no names. It's just literally, you know, showing, for example, the number of children who might have cognition and learning needs as a pie chart. And I was monitoring the chat last night when Malcolm was working with colleagues, and one head teacher of a secondary school just put, "This is brilliant because we can look at this and see if this matches what we're actually doing." And I was so pleased to see that comment, Jo, because that's what this is all about. It's not about this year for our professional development for our school, we're going to do dyslexia training. If that doesn't link to the actual needs of the children or young people in the school. So it's about being a bit more strategic, I suppose, and really thinking, are we doing the right things? And it's just a tool to support leaders in doing that.
We have our 1-page passports about our children's individual needs, but it's really good to see that maybe if there's a profile for the school, that you can see if there is, say, a large number of speech and language therapy needs or social communication challenges that children have, then the benefits of all staff being able to use the strategies that work for that particular group of children.
That's exactly our intention. So, for example, on Tuesday, our 5 cluster leads and lead SENCOs worked with Malcolm, and he prepared a document to help them see within, for example, a cluster of 22 schools, what were the key needs, so that when they're then getting the right support, is it that they need to have a real push on speech and language? Is it that they need to have a big push on supporting communication and interaction? Again, so that they can work a bit smarter, I suppose, with the resources that they've got.
Seems so simple. Why hasn't it been done before?
No, that was so many people said that last night, and I think my favourite comment, somebody said, I have never been so excited to receive an Excel spreadsheet before. I can't wait to play with it. So it's just a practical resource, and in a way a time-saving resource, because it gets to the nub of what it is we need to know. And busy practitioners, that's what they need.
It's for busy head teachers,
Yes.
and SENCOs, but is it something that parents and carers can access, and is there a way in which we can use it as a community that's helpful?
Well, it's on the South Glos, it's under safeguarding on the website, and absolutely anyone can access it, you know, regardless of their role. But just, I suppose, a little bit as a health warning, it is written for schools. You know, it is written for, in the main, for educators, but absolutely anyone can access. You can look at it. I'm very excited. Yesterday I met with Rachel Webb, who heads up early years, and in term 2, then just nearly ready, there is an early years inclusion toolkit, which has the same headings as this inclusion toolkit, but absolutely is about birth to 5. Also, they've updated their SEN early years handbook, which is for SENCOs, and they've also published a really lovely document to support what parents can do at home with their birth to 5-year-old child to support learning, and that's going to be posted on the local offer.
Parent carer reads the document and thinks, you know, I'm not convinced my school is meeting the standards in the inclusion toolkit. Is there anything that parents and carers can do? What would you recommend?
Well, I think if we go back to the principles of this, and it's very easy, for example, to use the word co-production about really working together, but the reality of that, we know, is quite hard to achieve. And I think that it absolutely is a two-way process. So if I was a parent, and I have been in that position where I've been worried about the provision in place for my son at the time, the first stage is often, you know, you just do, and I mean, we all know this, you talk to the SENCO. And sometimes it's not just about the SENCO. I would always talk to, if it was in secondary school in particular, whoever's responsible for teaching and learning in the school. You know, I'd say, please, could I have a meeting with the SENCO and the lead for teaching and learning, because, you know, these are my concerns. In a primary school, it would be the same. So it would be talking about, you know, what it is that you are really concerned about. And I think what's so important, and I've worked with so many parents, Jo, over the years, who will say to me things like, actually, you know, the school is really friendly and they always welcome me in, but actually sometimes things don't change. So with those meetings, it's so important, isn't it, to actually agree an action from that meeting with a time scale. So, you know, if you are really concerned, it's having that discussion, having an agreement of what you're going to try, what you as a parent are going to do, what the school's going to do. If age appropriate, what the child or young person is going to do, and then a date to review it. Is it actually happening? Is it working? Section 2, which I suppose is really about the teaching and learning part. 2.1, so I've just got to read this a second because I can't remember all 13 sections, but it starts off with the importance of what what all children should access as high quality teaching, and then it goes into 2.2 is about, well, this is really in practice what assess, plan, do, review looks like, and then it goes into each section takes one of the areas of need. So there's cognition and learning, communication and interaction, social, emotional and mental health, and sensory and or physical, and those sections are quite large. And so that goes through the universal targeted, what should happen at every stage, and gives teachers and leaders guidance on what good practice would actually look like. So they're quite meaty, I suppose, sections of the toolkit, but that also helps. So when, for example, I was working with an advisor, when we quality assured to check that we, that it was as good as it could be, and I'm absolutely not saying it's perfect, it's not, but when I worked with advisors, it was lovely because one member of the advisory team said, "Oh, Kim, fantastic, I will use this in schools, so I can take that into schools and say, okay, shall we have a go at this? Have you thought of that? What about this?" And so it's practical, and it will evolve, it will grow, it will change as we have new research that comes out, when we find other things that might work. And it's really envisaged that the SEND clusters, with the lead SENCOs leading their team of SENCOs from their cluster schools, will actually have a go at some of these things and try them out. And it's having that spirit, I suppose, of trust and openness, and it might not work, but let's have a go. We haven't done this before, because that saying, if we keep on doing the same things, we'll get the same results. And we've just got to take a few risks and have a go.
Because you never know, you might just hit upon a unique, creative way of meeting needs for, groups of children or individuals that you hadn't really thought of before.
Because there is a really comprehensive training offer for schools as part of the toolkit. So the launch was the beginning. We've had our 2 data workshops this week, and then there are 4 sessions run by colleagues, and they're already, we've had a lot of buy-in. So there's a session on cognition and learning, so for each of the 4 areas of need. So they happen in October through to December. So a big buy-in.
This is part of the launch. There is that real sort of training. So it's not just, here's the document, here it is, but there's training that's taking place.
No, absolutely. And that training is 1.5 sessions on each area of need. And again, that's open to other professionals, not only to schools. So that, again, we can try and get that clarity of, we all need to be saying the same things. And that's what the toolkit really supports.
That's really good, because I think as a parent carer, you hear about a new toolkit and you think that's brilliant and it's online, but you do think, will this get practiced and remembered and embedded? But if there is this ongoing program of training and support.
All this is actually free to schools as well, so there's no cost implication, because we wanted to make sure that we got as many schools as possible to buy into this. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do. So, and we have had a good buy-in, and I think there is good collaboration in South Gloucestershire schools, whether they are local authority schools or whether they are part of academy trusts. We have had, a really good buy-in.
How often will the toolkit be reviewed? Just to make sure that it is sort of achieving its outcomes? And
so it's quite a lot is being reviewed at the moment. I need to tell you other things that are happening with it, but really every year. So it's because otherwise that's just too much work. And in a way, we've just got to run with it for a while and gather evidence about, you know, what's working, which sections are working well, which sections need a little bit of work. So there's some sections that aren't finished. So I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. It's really great that the early years work will come on board at the beginning of term 2, so that's in about 2 weeks time, so that's really exciting. But yes, every year in the summer when schools break, that will be the time that we'll update. So section 3 of the toolkit is all about social, emotional and mental health needs and reducing exclusions. And that's a real priority, Jo, for the local authority, because as you will know through your forum, some children and young people are excluded, do have fixed term and permanent exclusions, and there are a number of those that children and young people who have a special educational need. So section 3 is really important that we get that right. And at our launch, we had a fantastic speaker who's a head of a social, emotional, mental health special school, Jarlath O'Brien, who spoke so passionately and went down really well with our schools about the risks if we don't get this right. So really being quite open about the life chances then of children and young people who are excluded from school, and how that impacts on their mental health when they're adults. And I mean, we know this, but we have to keep reminding ourselves that what we really want in South Glos is a commitment not to exclude. That's what we're aiming for. And there are some exciting projects about how within our clusters we could perhaps develop alternative provision facilities so that a child would still remain at their school, but they might go and have some therapeutic work, some counselling work for a couple of hours a week with a teacher from their school and go back. So that's our next step. And that's what we're looking to grow. So section 3 absolutely looks at the different structures we've got in place at the moment, like the high risk group and the fair access panel if a child or young person is excluded. And it gives guidance around what we know nationally, so national guidance on things like reduced timetables, which I absolutely know can be really difficult for many parents when that's not done properly, especially for children and young people with autism. So that section will be reviewed in December, because there's 4 training sessions around section 2, but there's the final one is in December, and that's really not a training session, but it's looking at that section and trying to unpick with head teachers, you know, what else do we need? Have we got it right? What's working? I'm just looking at other documents there, because there's one on managed move guidance as well. So that whole idea that as one head teacher said, you know, what we really need to do is hold on to our own. So keep our children and young people in their schools. But there's work to do on that. Section 5 is advice and guidance. So that's really helping head teachers and SENCOs and teachers and support staff to know nationally what is thought of as good practice, what their role is, what their responsibilities are, and who they're accountable to. And I think that really helps head teachers who sometimes, well actually often, will be the line manager of the SENCO. And for 10 years I ran the national accredited SENCO course for Cornwall through Plymouth University, and many head teachers of small primary schools were also the school SENCO, and they sort of said to me, oh, I wish we'd had that advice when we were line managing our SENCO. I really wish we'd understood what we were supposed to do. So section 5 is to really help everybody, school governors, everybody, to understand what their role is in relation to SEND. You know, the code of practice absolutely says that there should be one form really, and for parents, you should tell your story once.
Yeah.
And I know that that absolutely doesn't happen. So within health, social care, I can remember a parent talking to us at one of the SENCO training days and just saying, and she had a child with medical needs, that she could have 22 different appointments in a month. And, you know, and every time she had to tell her story. So section 6 is trying to sort of, for all the different forms we use for SEN support, for an education, health and needs assessment, it just gives teachers a pro forma to use that's the same. And what we stressed at the launch last week is it's not just about the form. So a form is a form, it's a piece of paper. It's the principles behind that and the importance of what we've said in section 1. So a form remains a form. It's the quality of the information and how you've got that information. So it has to capture child voice, young person's voice, parent voice, the importance of co-production, the importance of clarity, and making sure that that graduated approach has happened. So it's a form, but it's much more important than that.
One of the benefits of it being an online document as well is that that's relatively much simpler to do rather than having outdated hard copies sitting on someone's shelf somewhere.
Absolutely. We knew that, you know, we have to, and I think that is one of the real, I suppose, benefits of how we've all worked in the last 6 months, is it's actually forced people to think differently about how they use technology. And yes, it is just there on the website, and that's where it will remain. It will never be a hard copy.
With everything that's been going on at the moment, how schools are involving the parents, I think it's really difficult for schools. They're in a really difficult position, and a lot of the IEP documents are being sort of pre-populated and sort of sent home for consideration rather than there being meetings set up or scheduled over Zoom. It's very difficult because teachers' days are really full, but it does feel, with everything going on, that some of that parent carer being at the centre alongside the child is quite difficult to manage in current circumstances. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations on that?
Well, I think that's something that we need to address, Jo, through the recovery curriculum and through the 5 cells that are working, because and cell 3 is about the unique child. So that absolutely is where we look at, in particular, children and young people with special educational needs. And I think from this meeting, I will raise that with the leads in cell 3, because I think for all of us and for all schools, well, for all walks of life at the moment, things are changing very quickly, aren't they? And every day brings another challenge, and anxiety levels are high, and anxiety levels for parents and actually for children and young people too, and for teachers. So again, I would say that as a parent, if you are feeling dissatisfied, maybe dissatisfied, or you're just feeling, well, this just doesn't feel right, is maybe suggesting yourself, I just wonder if, would you consider, could we have a Zoom call? Would it, I'd really like to talk to you about this. How could we do that? So just having that openness and just having, I suppose, the principles right about how we work in a sort of person-centered way. Just ask.
Yeah, through all of this difficult, difficult times. Yeah, I do feel for schools. They're trying to balance a lot of things at the moment, and it's another thing for them to squeeze into their day. But it does feel like if there is that commitment to keeping the parent carer at the centre of things, that there's that continued need for them to be involved in identifying your targets together. Maybe.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, so section 1.8, which is working with families, I think I need to add something to that around COVID, now, how we're working now and what that possibly could look like. So you've given me a really good, you've given me a piece of work. Thank you, Jo.
Oh, sorry.
No, I think that's a really good. I think that's a really good point. As a local authority, we have an inclusion partnership board which meets 3 times a year, and one of the things we do is we talk through every single school who might have, for example, they might have a trigger because their attendance rates are low for children with SEN, or exclusion rates are high. And so we have a meeting where all professionals sit around the table and we have actions around what is it that we need to do to support that school. So, and we have members of the SEN team, members of the educational psychology team who work with us with that, and our first meeting's in November, and I was preparing for that yesterday and making sure we had the right data so we can do things like look at how many children are being electively home educated, for example, since the beginning of COVID, and why is that, and is there anything we need to do as a local authority to support parents to find out more information. So a lot's happening behind the scenes that parents might not necessarily know about. So an SEN support plan should be, well, it's just part of the graduated approach. So if you've identified a child or young person as having a special educational need, the support plan is just your assess, plan, do, review. So what have you assessed? What have you planned to do? And schools, often there's quite a difference between what that would look like in a secondary school and a primary school. And the whole idea of section 6, she says, madly looking at it, is looking at SEN support forms, my support plan. It's just to try and say, look, if you have got a child or young person at SEN support, let's use the same form to gather that information so that we're all in the same jungle, chopping down the same trees, I suppose, rather than have a variety of forms. So a support plan probably wouldn't necessarily be how I'd phrased it, but this is absolutely coming from SENCO's working together in the summer term. It is really the assess, plan, do, review cycle. It's what are you doing? In simple terms, and it might look different in different schools. What are you assessing as the need? Okay, let's agree what we're going, what is the plan? What needs to happen? The do is the actions, and what is so important, Jo, is the review section. So really, our schools then, how are schools working with families to review the actions that have taken place? Because the whole idea of those assess, plan, do, review, which I think sometimes, if I'm absolutely honest with you, the SEN world can seem that you can have, as a SENCO, it's all about paperwork. And when I work with SENCOs, I absolutely challenge them to say, unless this form, this piece of paper, makes a difference to what is actually happening in the classroom or in additional support and provision, what are you doing with it? Yeah. We can have 20 sheets of paper, but if what is happening for that child isn't quality first teaching or quality additional support, then we're wasting our time. So the assess, plan, do, review, for me, I wouldn't actually care what that form looks like. It's more about the thinking behind it and how you're actually involving parents in coming up with the actions and actually reviewing whether it's making a difference. Because the whole idea of then the next cycle is, if that bit's worked, let's do more of it. And if this bit hasn't worked, let's get rid of it. So it should be that the more you do that at SEN Support and get that right, really, what's that all about? It's about knowing the child. It's absolutely about knowing that child. And that's what we're trying to do. And in all the pupil voice I do, you know, working in schools across the Southwest region, whether they're a 7-year-old or a 17-year-old, when I think about what they're really saying to me, when I say, you know, what is it that what do you want? What is it that you want your teachers to know about you? It's about knowing how I learn. I just want somebody to know how I learn, not necessarily the label I might carry with me, because that's the other thing, Jo, which the toolkit makes clear. A label can be really important. Of course it can. It can help parents make sense of a diagnosis, of an assessment, and it really can help children and young people think, oh, that's why I maybe think like that. So absolutely it's important, but it's not the end of the story. And where that label sometimes allows professionals, which includes teachers and other professionals, to make an assumption based on that label, that's what we're trying not to do. Part of the toolkit, right in the beginning, we have we call them the 6 A's, the things that we really want all that we do to be based on, and those are about aspirations, it's about achievement, it's about being an advocate for a child, it's about seeing, having access, so seeing, which is in your video, which was really powerful, which we used at the launch, Jo. It's about seeing the whole child, not just about the learning of literacy, English, maths. It's about, you know, the whole 360 view of the child. So it's about access, it's about accountability. We can have all the best things in place in the toolkit, but unless we have accountability measures in, we're not going to get as far as we need to get. So we all need to be accountable. That includes teachers, parents, school leaders, other professionals. You know, we have to be open and honest, but we do have to be accountable to each other if we're going to move forward.
Sometimes when we're in our meetings and we're looking at the targets as part of the assess, plan, do, review, you can get sidetracked by whether like the educational targets being met, and you sort of discuss whether that's been met or not. And we haven't, from my personal experience, sometimes there is that missing around the discussion around the strategies that have been tried and actually what's working and what needs adjusting. So yeah, so that if there's a shift away from just focusing on whether that's been tick that one off and move on to the next one, but an actual sort of more fuller discussion around what's worked and what hasn't, I would really welcome that.
No, absolutely, because I think again that comes down to, doesn't it, as a parent, sometimes it can feel quite daunting to be in a school. It can feel quite daunting sometimes to work with, you know, especially when you as a parent feel you absolutely know your child and you're so passionate. Of course you are. And I think when I've been on the other side of the table in meetings about my son, and you can feel so frustrated, sort of, well, why aren't they getting what I'm actually saying here? You know, I know that if you do this, this will happen. It'll be like a, you know, if you talk to him in that way, then he will leave the classroom and I will get a phone call and have to pick him up type scenario. So you're absolutely right. It's not in those meetings. I mean, we used to call them individual education plans. Well, those IEPs, they're not there anymore, and they never were actually. They even in the old code of practice, you didn't have to do them. What the code actually asks for is clarity that a school knows a target for a child or young person and is putting the provision in place. So it's quite general. And again, in the SEN world, lots of forms arrived, IEP forms that, were capturing that information. And from my personal belief is if we spent the time in really looking at the teaching and learning side of that, and what you said, Joe, the different strategies that we could have a go at, that we could try, we'd all be better served. So again, as a parent, being able to say, okay, so you want, let's say it's a primary school, you want Jake to be able to know the different sounds, these 5 different sounds, which wouldn't be unusual in a support plan. Well, as a parent, what might engage your child in doing that. So then you're right, talk about the strategies. And as a parent, I might say, do you know what? He's so mad keen on dinosaurs at the moment. Have you thought of doing, I wonder if that would work. It's that sort of way of talking to each other, isn't it? And the teacher might say, well, that's a really good idea, Kim. We've tried that, but actually we're going to have a go at this. Let's see if that works. So you're right. It's what we tried to push at the launch last week is section 6 gives you some very useful forms, but unless you've got the systems in place of how you talk and work with parents and how you gather information, how you think about strategies, how you review what's working, I'm afraid it just stays a form.
True, that's true. Sometimes we get inundated by paperwork as well as parent carers. And when you see another form come by, you're just like, oh, it's another bit of paperwork. More to do.
So we're already working with the SEN clusters because obviously the way that they work is they have money, they have a budget for their schools to support those children at SEN Support. So again, through the data that we did this week, it's trying to identify the needs of the clusters of schools. You'll know that some clusters, I'm sure that Kate will have said this, for example, have commissioned speech and language therapists. Each cluster has access to an educational psychologist for a certain amount of time, and they can buy in more time. Many clusters, for example, are enlisting through health and occupational therapist. So all those things are happening, and through the SEN cluster leads and through the lead SENCOs, working with SENCOs in their clusters, we will keep the toolkit going. So it's okay, what training needs do you have? And it might be, for example, that clusters say, actually, we need some work on assessment. How do we assess these needs? Could somebody come and do that for us? So it's absolutely, the SEN clusters will be the workhorse, I suppose, as a way of phrasing it, the workhorse of the toolkit.
A lot of sense, because that was the one thing that I was struggling with when we were holding the events, way back when, goodness, was last year sometime now, trying to find out from the parent carer perspective what good SEN support might look like. And I just couldn't get my head around how it would go from a document into action. But it makes a lot more sense if you got the sort of cluster fund project in the middle that's, looking at creatively finding the strategies and things that might be able to help a school and individual children as well, Katie said, because I had thought that it was just group interventions, group work based interventions, but she said that there's actually scope if there is a real need for meeting an individual need, that can be done for a short term. Obviously these are all short term interventions and they don't go on forever. But yes, that makes a lot more sense when you think about it. There is this guide out there, but there is this thing that's putting it into action as well. So thank you so much, Kim.
That's lovely to talk to you, Jo Marie. It was been lovely, and that time has flown.
Oh gosh, I know when you talk about things that you're quite excited about and interesting in, it just so goes, doesn't it? Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for spending time listening to me. That was really great for me to talk about it. So thank you.